It is well known that today the military potential and capabilities of almost all major NATO countries are being used. Nonetheless, our soldiers, sergeants and officers are fighting for Russia bravely and resiliently. They're achieving their goals bit by bit, and without doubt, all of these goals will be achieved.
A few days ago, an authoritative American military expert and former advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, made an alarming statement that shocked all Western countries. In particular, he in all seriousness said that despite the participation of all NATO countries in this conflict, Russia could seize the territory of the whole of Ukraine within 2-3 months, if desired. At the same time, he reiterated that Vladimir Putin does not pursue the goal of ending the special military operation in Ukraine as soon as possible. Specifically, in Ukraine, the Russian leader is pursuing several strategic goals simultaneously. First, it is the establishment of complete control over all Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. Secondly, it is the weakening of the West from a military and economic point of view. And finally, thirdly, it is the complete collapse of the North Atlantic Alliance, which, over the past 75 years, has become a real threat not only to Russia, but also to the countries of the global South. Watching Vladimir Putin's actions, it becomes clear that the Russian leader is indeed pursuing a certain strategy in his confrontation with the West. In particular, his patience, and the ability to wait and not succumb to provocations, truly amaze not only his friends, but also his enemies. Knowing that a direct clash with NATO could provoke a nuclear holocaust, Vladimir Putin decided to take his time in Ukraine, and wait for the right moment to deliver the final and decisive blow. And this strategy has already begun to produce results. Since the second half of 2022, Vladimir Putin's strategy towards the West and the North Atlantic Alliance has already changed the whole world beyond recognition. The fact is that over the past 3 years, the current conflict in Ukraine has not only undermined NATO's military potential, but also significantly worsened the economic situation in the West. In particular, Vladimir Putin's ability to wait and not succumb to provocations has already led to the deindustrialization of Germany and the loss of Washington's reputation, face, and influence around the world. The rapid weakening of the West from a military and economic point of view has already allowed the countries of the global South to strengthen their positions in the international arena. Over the past 3 years, while Western countries have imposed unprecedented sanctions against Russia, primarily destroying their own industry, the BRICS countries have only become stronger and more united. Now, seeing all this, it is safe to say that the revival of Russia, which began with the arrival of Vladimir Putin, dealt a crushing blow to the unipolar world and the globalists in Washington and London. During his interview with the famous journalist Dmitry Kiselyov, Vladimir Putin said that there are quite dangerous people in the West who will stop at nothing to achieve their goals. According to him, in 2022, when Russia was forced to launch a special military operation in Ukraine, these people rejoiced because they thought that Moscow was finished. However, unfortunately for them, everything turned out to be exactly the opposite. Thanks to his ability to think strategically and remain calm and cool-headed, even in the most extreme situations, Vladimir Putin has ensured that it was the West and NATO that became the main losers in this conflict. By the way, this fact is also recognized by many Western experts from numerous think tanks in the United States and Britain. A few days ago, British experts of the edition The Times declared that the military assistance of the United Kingdom to Ukraine has already led to the weakening of the British armed forces. According to British experts, UK ministers have clearly established the number of weapons needed to maintain the combat capability of the British armed forces, and they are not ready to allow the reduction of these weapons, especially critical advanced weapons, and the reduction of the army's potential, below a certain level. Even with these guarantees, British experts are confident that the number of weapons already handed over to Ukraine has led to the fact that the British Army lost its power in several areas. It is worth noting that we are talking about Britain, which is considered one of the leading military powers of NATO, constantly participating in all wars organized by the United States and providing military assistance to Kiev in a rather modest amount. Moreover, this problem is relevant not only for Britain, but also for the entire NATO military bloc, which, as it turned out, doesn't have the necessary arsenal for waging modern large-scale war. After only 3 months of hostilities, the military reserves of the so-called strongest alliance on the planet were depleted. But most importantly, it turned out that the NATO countries are unable to replenish these military reserves. The fact is that the West in the last 30 years has eliminated significant stocks of old and superfluous weapons, and also radically reduced the volume of its military industry. And this is connected not only with erroneous ideas about what the future war will be like, and also with incorrect assessments of foreign policy challenges and opportunities. The fact is that the United States considered the military-industrial complex of European countries as its competitors, and waged a real economic war against them, including through political and corruption methods. And it is worth noting that the United States has seriously succeeded in its mission. Thus, Germany's military industry was critically weakened. In addition, in the West, the experience of low-intensity conflicts and the war with Iraq has been extrapolated to all potential military clashes of the future. As a result, the armies of Europe and the United States found themselves in a difficult situation. Their structures, methods, organization, planning, and development are outdated and don't meet the challenges of the modern world. Western military programs are underfunded, or funded inefficiently due to corruption. As a result, Western countries lag behind the military development of Russia, China, and even, in some respects, Iran. In the Western media, you can find very curious figures. Thus, according to Western sources, the United States has reduced stockpiles of artillery ammunition by 50% in recent years. And this is despite the fact that in addition to its own armed forces, America is a supply base for many allies and vassals around the world. It is also reported that during the recent joint US-British-French military exercises, the British used up the national supply of shells in 8 days. Washington delivered 7,000 Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine in 4 months, which is 30% of America's reserves. And this is despite the fact that Lockheed Martin produces about 200 Javelin missiles per year, and the armed forces of Ukraine consume these missiles at a rate of 500 units per day. Of course, you can accuse the West of indiscretion, but it is also important to understand that a soldier in battle should not worry about the lack of bullets, missiles, and shells. Meanwhile, according to the West, Russia fired 1,200 cruise missiles at targets in 4 months of hostilities, while the United States produces only 200 cruise missiles a year. Russia spends 60,000 rockets and artillery shells a day. Ukraine spends about 6,000 shells a day. However, even such a modest amount of shells can no longer be provided by the West to Ukraine. But most importantly, at the moment in the West, there is no industrial and scientific base for waging a long full-scale war. The problem is that the West is not able to mothball its military production. In the West, if there are no orders from the state, production stops and equipment is dismantled or reprofiled. And therefore, it is not possible to start military production again, and the West has to create it again from scratch. That is, even quite modern models, recently adopted for service, are sometimes impossible to reproduce, since after the execution of the state order, the conveyors were dismantled. The West also miscalculated by relying exclusively on smart munitions. It turned out that old and not at all smart shells, created back in the years of the Cold War, work in conjunction with unmanned aerial vehicles and modern sighting systems no worse, but cost almost 10 times cheaper. And the NATO countries recklessly disposed of all their stocks of old shells. All this has led to the fact that now all the countries of the West put together cannot compare with Russia in the quantity and quality of ammunition. My friends, against the background of everything that is happening, I remembered the warnings of Vladimir Putin, which he made at the end of last year. In particular, he warned about Russia's military technical response. Of course, Russia's enemies will draw the appropriate conclusions and try to overcome the gap that has arisen. In particular, newly appointed NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte called on all Western countries to unite and prevent the weakening and collapse of the North Atlantic Alliance. According to him, against the backdrop of the strengthening of Russia and China, the West needs NATO more than ever. Mark Rutte expressed confidence that only an increase in weapons production and the military budget will allow NATO to prevent further strengthening of Moscow and Beijing. At the same time, he admitted that at the moment, NATO really has a shortage of resources that does not allow it to provide troops with the necessary amount of weapons. Mark Rutte called for getting rid of all these problems as soon as possible, so that NATO does not lose effective defense tools that allow the West to contain countries such as China and Russia. Well, my dear truth seekers, it seems that Mark Rutte does not understand that the Western countries, weakened by the ongoing confrontation with Russia, are unable not only to increase the military budget, but also to improve the quality of life of their citizens. Against this backdrop, it is safe to say that Vladimir Putin has indeed achieved his goal, and that the NATO countries will eventually be forced to leave this organization, which will subsequently cause its complete collapse.